Alright, I did my senior thesis this year on Queen Victoria and Victorian culture. And getting started, I was originally planning on talking about death during the Victorian era, but noticing other cultural changes that were happening, I decided to focus on not only death, but also the other changes that were occurring. Victorian England, the Victorian era was from 1837 through 1901. It was ruled by Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert, and was separated into early Victorian, mid-Victorian, and late Victorian periods. Queen Victoria was born in May of 1819, and she ruled over England and Ireland. She married Prince Albert, her husband, in 1840, and eventually became Empress of India in 1877. Prince Albert was born August of 1819. He was known for bringing in like science into the English country and creation of the Great Exhibition in 1851. He tragically died from chronic disease in December of 1861. And his legacy did last well after his death, and his influence of English culture with direct and indirect movements. Thesis was, unique as it was, the Victorian era became culturally diverse and different than any monarchical rule in English history. This was due to the influence that Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert, had on altering the English culture and creating the uniqueness of the Victorian era. In doing so, the cultural changes revolved mainly around religion, celebrations, and death. In terms of religion, Victorian England, the churches, there was two main churches, the Church of England, the Roman Catholic Church, the Protestants and Catholics. And one of the main instances that happened was the Oxford movement. Originally started with members from the Oxford University in response to the Reform Parliament in 1833. And during this movement, the churches took advantage in using it to gain religious converts. There was the Anglican, which is the Protestant, versus the Roman Catholic churches. In terms of science, impacted religion greatly during this time, and that was from it being brought into England by Prince Albert with the Great Exhibition. It was happening currently at the same time as the Oxford movement, and one of the participants of this convention that brought in scientists and philosophers was Charles Darwin, who later on in 1872 published his book Origin of Species, which contradicts the Christian teachings on how life began. Continuing with that, the rejection of Christian teachings involved involved evolution and the superiority of men, which contradict the starting out of humans with the origin of Adam and Eve as was portrayed in the Bible. With this new information, increase of atheists and non-religious groups began to form and become very popular in England, and they were based on religion and scientific philosophy, and also included free thought, skepticism, rationalism, antagonism, secularism, and humanism. In terms of back to the churches, in light of this new science that was occurring, along with other things, the Church of England created Protestant Sunday schools, as in to keep their young minds connected to the church and not distracted from the economic and political events that were going on. There was also dissenter groups, which was the non-religious groups. They created public British schools, and which was an alternative to the Church of England and their Protestant Sunday schools. And this also too started the notion of public education in England as well. Both of these schools, the teachings that were occurring were both relating to religious converts and bringing in new members and all of such. And also creating a school, but for different reasons, the Roman Catholic Church formed schools and goal of keeping their religion strong in England, more so the general Christian religion, but also to remembering the traditional foundations of the Catholic religion, and also a little bit bringing new members into the church. That's going to be a give or take. One of their main goals was taking bringing younger individuals into these schools from the middle and upper wealth classes in England to train them to become priests, as in to bring these new members into the church. This was done through revivalist missions, and one of the methods involved was public English prayers, and which were different than the ones in church, as they were more easier and more understandable to the common people. Another thing is a ploy of shock tactics, which is still in use today, and this is one of the most frequent ones that was used, as an open coffin containing the mortal remains of an unrepentant sinner from the local mission, according to the priest. That's what the priest told the people. And the individuals were then invited to investigate the coffin. And when they did, they found themselves staring back at them through their reflection in a mirror. So they were the ones that was the unrepentant sinner if they did not convert to the church. The end of the Oxford movement, really it didn't bring the movement to an end, but it started the end of it. This was done by John Henry Newman. He was originally a priest of the Anglican Protestant Church, and eventually in October 1845 converted to the Roman Catholic Church. Along with that, he had shown that the Church of England could be entirely separate from the state and state control, which would mean that the monarchy and currently Queen Victoria would no longer be the head of the church. The church would be completely separate from political state control. Also, Newman brought forth new research about how the Roman Catholic Church, Catholic Church separated from Rome, and if his research is proven true, it would basically put the Protestant Reformation in void, which would be later on. Eventually, all this brought, most in part, the Oxford movement to an end. So, overall, religion in Queen Victoria, she was the head of the Church of England, and played a role in the decisions they made during the beginning and middle of the Oxford movement, until near the end of the movement, the church had separated from the state of England, and therefore she no longer had as much control over what was going on. And that was when kind of her influence in the matter was lost. But she did have influence in the matter when the educational schools were being brought up, also along with the scientific implications being brought into London by Prince Albert. All of that affected the religious culture present in the Victorian era. Moving on. Christianity and the celebration of Christmas. Originally, the Christmas tradition began as a pagan festival. It was adopted by the early Christian church and eventually banned in the English Reformation. After the end of the reign of King Charles II, Christmas became a private celebration within the home that was influenced by the practices of the church, and mainly focused around the birth of Jesus Christ. And that happened during that was basically seen as a private celebration during the 17th and 18th centuries. The 19th century, which was when the Victorian era started, that all changed. It was publicized and made public because of the royal family. in doing this, Christmas basically, this new form and traditions that were added to Christmas basically like showed the Victorian spirit. Lots of charitable acts. There was tons of literature and poems, including A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And one of the charitable acts that's known was on the day before Christmas in 1842. It was declared in the Times by Queen Victoria that every poor adult in Windsor town be given 4 pounds of beef, 2 pounds of bread, 1 pound of plum pudding, a peck of potatoes, and 2 pints of ale. And this was so that every family could be able to have that traditional family Christmas that would be described in the Christmas Carol. Speaking of Christmas Carol, it was published in 1843, written by Charles Dickens, and basically exemplifies giving without receiving, charitable acts, family dinner, giving presents to children, and basically captured the entire spirit of the Victorian Christmas itself. A poem that came about during around the same time in 1822 by Clement Clarke Morrell as A Visit from St. Nicholas. And basically the modern version of Santa Claus today is originated from this poem. It took the original idea of St. Nicholas and mixed it with the idea of the spirit of Christmas, joy of Christmas, or King Cheer, and also with the Victorian spirit, and created what we know today as Santa Claus. Along with that, new traditions that were also brought was the decorating of the Christmas tree, coins in the Christmas pudding, Christmas cards, originally designed, first one was designed by John Calcott Hulsey in 1843 by the request of Henley Cole, and started with the elite members of society like the royal family, and eventually through popularization moved and transitioned into the general public, and also to opening of presents in front of the Christmas tree on Christmas Day. The royal family and their Christmas celebration, most of these new traditions started when the royal family, and pictured in front of their tree that is shown here, was published in the Illustrated London News in 1848. Prince Albert of the tree decorating and the inclusion of a Nuremberg angel at the top was taken from his traditions from Germany that was brought over, and Queen Victoria, and bringing traditions from her childhood, begun taking her children to the pantomimes staged at the Royal Lyceum in the 1840s and 1850s. Based off the Christmas celebrations held by the royal family, ideal Victorian family Christmas celebration came about, and this was for families of all wealths and backgrounds. It became common to have these things happen on Christmas Day. First will be the opening of presents under a decorated Christmas tree, and then a visit to the local church on Christmas morning, followed by a traditional family lunch or dinner, which would be followed by games like blindman's buff and charades. After that, a visit to the pantomime in the evening to watch a Christmas play, and then the children would head off to bed for the night. Overall, Christmas had originally started out as a private occurrence that was through the church, but the ruling of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert brought it out into the public and made it quite popular. German customs were brought over, and as well as traditions introduced by Queen Victoria, which brought about new traditions such as displaying and decorating the Christmas tree, cards and crackles, carol singing, and the pantomime. Death in the Victorian era was very common, considering with the current sanitary conditions and the fact that still multiple diseases were ravaging the country. Mortality rates were very high during the 19th century, and walking in the town, a site of death or a funeral procession going on was a very common thing. So most of the stuff though surrounding death in terms of cultural existed before the Victorian era, but was not so much as important culturally to the people until after Queen Victoria went into her absence. The death of the Duke of Wellington, he died in 1852, and both Prince Albert and Queen Victoria were greatly saddened by this. And in terms of this, Prince Albert took it upon himself to devise the Duke's acquaintances and saw that the crepe was being used everywhere, which that popularized the use of the crepe. Later on, Prince Albert passed in 1861 from a chronic disease, which greatly impacted Queen Victoria, and this is where all these traditions of death begin to become very culturally important, not just socially but culturally. This is a picture of a mourning coach from the Duke of Wellington's funeral. This is just one out of several that were part of the funeral. Most of these were included in all funerals, especially ones that were wealthy, because what was shown in the funeral procession, the more extravagant things showed the wealth of the family and the individual themselves. And description of this, this is a description that of Prince Albert's funeral procession that was put together by Queen Victoria herself, and also from Prince Albert's wishes, along with other members of the family. Mourning practices that were implemented after Prince Albert's funeral. This is one of the new traditions that were new, were mourning cards and mourning mounts. The cards were printed in black, either on silver and white, and frequently included traditional symbols of grief, such as the inverted torch, the weeping willow, the shrouded urn, and kneeling female mourners. And the cards can be seen in the right picture. There's an example of two of them. And the left picture is an example of the special mourning mounts that were created to hold the mourning cards during the funeral procession. Sometimes they'd be on black velvet backgrounds, which included designs of inverted torches, palms, broken columns, ivy, and Gothic ornament. Also, too, these traditions were in practice before the Victorian era, but were more important not only socially but culturally after Prince Albert's death, because of what Queen Victoria did and because of the impact that her absence had on the people. For the homes of those that died, the blinds would be drawn and one or two mutes would stand on the doorstep representing the visitation of death and posting as the guards of the professional mourners of antiquity. The people that were living in the household of someone who died would be dressed in mourning dress, which would normally include all black wear, and every member would be responsible for dressing with black clothing, mourning jewelry, and even if there was a wedding, your wedding dress must be black. And this was socially required by society and eventually became just integrated into the English culture. Like members of the household and even servants had to follow this. And this was due because mourning dress was rooted in the fear of the dead returning and was worn as to make the living invisible to the dead. These expectations of death displays were part of the English culture as required by society before Victoria. After Prince Albert's death, they were expanded on to high extremes very greatly and integrated itself into the culture of the peoples. Along with this, there was burial methods and cremation. Burial happened in the town or the church graveyard, and cremation was a new method that started to become popular during the Victorian era due to its practical nature and hygienic disposal. There was small discourse with the Roman Catholic Church because of belief in body resurrection, but it never really inhibited the popularity of it. and the fascination that the Victorian people had with death. One of the examples of their fascination with cremation and stuff is that blueprints were constructed for pyramids to be created where the ashes of the dead could be placed. These pyramids were never built, but they were planned to be built in London. And just the idea of pyramids to be built in remembrance of the dead, to place these ashes and stuff, kind of reminds me based off of the Egyptian pyramids. But that shows how dedicated these people were to deaths, to the practices of death and the rituals and everything surrounding it. Queen Victoria had influenced the culture with death due to her lack of public showings until 1880. She still participated in her monarchical affairs, but even those were very selective to who she met with and who she saw. Most communication she had done through letters. Also during that time, she erected multiple memorials and monuments all around England in remembrance of Prince Albert. Along with that, she had completed 3 volumes of literature dedicated in memory to Prince Albert. This was during her time of solitude, and the last book was inclusion of her personal diary that she had kept during her time of mourning. Was one of these memorials that she had created of Prince Albert stands in London Hyde Park, and was finished 12 years after 1864 when it had started. Sir George Gilbert Scott was in charge of building this sculpture after he won a worldwide competition that Queen Victoria had initiated in January 1892 and finding someone to make the statue. Basically, death had become more symbolic through the Victorian era in terms of cultural, due to multiple forms of representation like arts, literature, and monuments, mainly done by Queen Victoria herself in response to Prince Albert's death. My remarks in conclusion: the impact that Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had on the unique culture of the Victorian era was in the areas of religion, celebrations, and death. Queen Victoria played a minor role in religious changes, but impacted the traditions and rituals surrounding the processions and celebrations of death. Prince Albert was involved in the religious aspect in influencing the growth of science in England through the Great Exhibition, which caused problems in the churches. Also, he was a major part of the new traditions that was introduced to the Christmas celebration, along with publicization from the media, newspapers, literature, and all that such, and also word of mouth, and which all helped spread them across the English country. Overall, the royal family, whether directly or indirectly, through impacts and or things, made the Victorian era one of a kind through its changing and developing culture. And then bibliography of sources I have used. Go through here. And then these are the sources for the images I used in order of appearance in this PowerPoint. And that is it. Thank you.